Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so very much for being part of this conversation today. My name is Maylene Hamto, and I am an Executive Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Consultant for the WTIA DEI Center of Excellence. I also serve as a leadership coach and practice partner with Diversity Waymaker Consulting. Thank you again for being part of this panel discussion. We are so glad that you're here, engaged, and ready to learn with us. If you don't mind, please put your name, organization, location, and social media links that you would like to share in chat so we can all get acquainted. And I will do the same as well. Okay. And again, we are really delighted to have you here today as we present a thought-provoking conversation about the impacts of the June Supreme Court ruling, striking down the practice of race-based admissions policies in colleges and universities. The panelists that we have put together bring a rich suite of experiences leading diversity functions in higher education and academic health centers. We are so honored to welcome their unique perspectives. I want to share a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to my colleagues, Greg and Kelly. As you know, this event is being offered in a Zoom webinar format. Please feel free to use the chat to share your reflections or reactions. If you have a specific question you'd like the panelists to address, please post it in the Q&A. You can see the Q&A section here. So we may collate all your queries and ask them of the panelists. And then toward the end of the panel, I will post a link to a post-event feedback survey. Please respond. Your feedback is really important to us as we continue to enhance our offerings. And we also have a few important announcements about upcoming DEI Center of Excellence events. And then I'll turn it over to Gregory Glover, our Head of Business Development, and our Vice President of Government and Community Affairs, Kelly Fukai. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So I want to share that on October 25th, we are hosting Tamika Sitchin-Spruce, disability justice activist, filmmaker, and co-director of the Michigan Disability Rights Coalition. She is our keynote presenter for National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Tamika will share the principles of disability justice and delineate the differences among the practices and policies of justice, accommodation, and inclusion. She will also present data and key considerations for disability practices audit. After her presentation, she will be joined in a Q&A session by Olivia Fadul, who is a disability advocate and licensed clinical counselor, and Emma McLean, who works for Apprenti as the Accessibility Apprenticeship Program Manager. And I will also put the link to the event in chat in case you are interested in joining us as well for that event. And on November 9th, we are hosting a presentation by Dr. Allison Scott, CEO of the Caper Foundation. The foundation shares the WTIA vision of diversifying the technology ecosystem. Caper Foundation believes the industry can collectively improve conditions to better reflect future opportunities for Black, Indigenous, Latinx communities, and society as a whole. Dr. Allison Scott will share the lessons learned from the nonprofit's work in the tech sector, and her remarks will be followed by a fireside chat with WTIA Chief Diversity Officer Yolanda Chase. We hope that you will join us for that event as well. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Greg Glover, to share a few words about the WTIA Center of Excellence.
Thank you so much, Maylene. My name is Greg Glover. I'm the Head of Business Development for our WTIA DEI Center of Excellence, and it is an honor to be here. Well, our Center of Excellence is comprised of a team with over 60 years of HR DEI experience. And this is so timely because based off of the SCOTUS ruling and the environment that we're in, there's so many organizations that are looking for how to proceed going forward. We utilize and we're powered by Diversity Waymaker Foundation, which focuses on building the competencies of leaders. Now, this is very different from many other DEI strategies and platforms out there, is because we believe in focusing on building the competencies of leaders with 12 powerful competency building traits that we feel will be vital to leading organizations, especially during this very difficult time. The outcomes will be many, though you'll be able to empower employees. And when the employees are engaged and empowered, we believe that that leads to increased innovation, increased employee satisfaction, and most importantly, distinguishing your organization from other organizations where DEI is not woven into the foundation or the DNA of the organization. So by completing our program and working with us and allowing us the opportunity to work with you, we know you're going to see significant results. And so many organizations are wondering where to go now based off this SCOTUS ruling. By utilizing the training that we have available, you'll be able to have a clear direction and going forward. We're also extremely excited right now because we've been able to take the Diversity Waymaker blended experience, move that platform. We will be offering 100% online training, which will be 8 weeks of training that will have mentorship that is built into the program. This will provide that small group one-on-one coaching that so many leaders are needing now. And we are confident that once you complete this program, you'll have the tools necessary to go forward. So we're really excited about that. This is going to take the Center of Excellence to the next phase and also take those organizations who have a desire and understand the complexities of DEI and why it's so vital now. We'll be able to help and partner with you as you go forward, leading your organizations into the following year, if not the next decade. And with that, I will turn this over to Kelly, who is VP of Policy with our WTIA.
Thanks, Greg. Good morning. My name is Kelly Fukai, and I'm the Vice President of Government and Community Affairs for the Washington Technology Industry Association. We work in service of our membership to develop a robust policy ecosystem for the technology sector across a number of work streams. This includes proactively tracking and engaging on legislation, contributing expertise and thought leadership on relevant issues impacting the sector, and working collaboratively with our members and policymakers. We do this all with the end goal of creating a robust, equity-centered tech sector that empowers thriving communities. I'm truly grateful to be here with you today for the second part of our series focused on equity in the post-affirmative action world. The first event, which was held in June on the heels of the Supreme Court ruling, was focused on the shifting policy landscape and its impact on the sector. We discussed the landmark Supreme Court case, impacts and lessons learned in education and business from the passage of I-200 in Washington state over 2 decades ago, and what future work needs to be done in the policy space to make sure that we preserve DEI programs. I am really excited today to continue this conversation where we get to roll up our sleeves and talk about why DEI isn't going away and how we can continue to elevate this work in academia, organizations, and in policy. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to my colleague, Mylene, so we can get this conversation going.
Thanks so much, Kelly and Greg, for providing us with that background about our work here at WTIA and the conversations that we are supporting as well. I want to begin to welcome the panel, which will be moderated by our Chief Diversity Officer, Yolanda Chase. Many of you know that Yolanda has been at the helm of the WTIA DEI Center of Excellence since 2020. And throughout her career, Yolanda has built a solid reputation as a trusted advisor and expert, spending many years consulting in leadership capacities for a variety of industries within the public, private, nonprofit, and government sectors. She leads this conversation from her vantage point in DEI leadership and her deep experience in strategic planning and program improvement. By crafting solutions designed to evolve DEI practices that ultimately promote personal and professional well-being and equity for all. Welcome, Yolanda.
Thanks so much, Mylene. Thank you for such a warm and kind introduction. and welcome everyone to this very exciting topic and panel. I'm really thrilled to have such an esteemed a group of wonderful women and experts to grace our virtual stage today. We love the fact that they're going to lend their voices to the perspective on this very controversial and largely confusing topic relative to the SCOTUS decision around upending affirmative action for higher education. We want to make sure that we start today by introducing this wonderful panel and giving them the opportunity to talk a little bit about what their primary charge is inside their organization. And I also like, panel, thank you so much, to talk a little bit about your accountability to DE&I. So let's start there. And we'll start with introduction. So Crystal, if you can start, that'd be great.
Thank you, Yolanda. Hi, everyone. My name is Crystal Roberts, and I serve as the inaugural director for the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging for UMass Memorial Health System. I report to the Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer, Dr. Brian K. Gibbs, who's also in an inaugural position. We, as a department, report up to the President of Community Hospitals, who's also the Chief Administrative Officer, and that person then reports up to the CEO and President. So just kind of giving you a sense of our organizational chart to see where we have influence. Our office is charged with all things DEIB for the UMass Memorial Health System. That includes things like system-wide diversity training, unconscious bias training, anti-harassment training and education. We do consultations with various department leaders, or even with employees who want to, bend our ear and to see if they're experiencing what they're experiencing and have a trusted, safe space to talk. We also help to facilitate culture change through management of a $1 million seed fund that allows our caregivers to leverage the resources to improve the culture of belonging and inclusion, not only for employees, but potentially to put in a project that will help to decrease the healthcare inequities for our patient population. We're also charged with re-engaging the employee resource group and establishing a diversity advisory council. We influence the workforce development as well as diversity hiring protocols as well, to refine them to make sure that we include a diversity lens to enhance our ability to recruit and retain employees from disparate backgrounds. We also just in general amplify diverse voices, histories, and perspectives in our role. In terms of our organization, UMass Memorial Health is the largest healthcare system in central Massachusetts. We're the clinical partner of UMass Chan Medical School. And I mention that because before 2020, December 2020, when my chief diversity officer was hired, there was one diversity professional who managed everything in the health system as well as in the school, and that just was an ineffective model. And when I say that we're a part of the health system, that system is comprised of a network of care, which includes a 3-campus academic medical center, 3-member community hospitals. We have a behavioral health agency, as well as various affiliated community hospitals, outpatient clinics, community-based physician practices, long-term care facilities, home health, hospice, as well as our medical group, which is what houses all of our providers. So I'll stop talking now, but I do want to add that as a clinical partner of UMass Chan Medical School, our physicians have access to the latest clinical trials and cutting-edge technology in order to provide our patients with quality and compassionate healthcare. But if we don't offer that through a diversity lens, we're missing the mark. And so they know that, and that's why they went ahead and hired a chief diversity officer so that we can begin to strategically approach this work. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction, Crystal. Pamela?
Hi, thank you, Yolanda, and thank you for having me join the panel today. So I'm with Mount Sinai Health System in New York, and we are an academic medical institution. We also have a school of medicine, a nursing school, 8 hospitals, and many ambulatory facilities, behavioral health, and not dissimilar from what Crystal shared. The work that I do is wide throughout the organization. I'm responsible for implementing and upholding practices to drive our mission to be an anti-racist organization, as well as embed the key principles and tenets of diversity, equity, inclusion in the organization. We report through our dean of our medical school and also our CEO of our health system. Another important aspect of the work that I'm doing now with equity being amplified and elevated as a key value is working a lot with our staff, our communities, and others to be very specific about how we use data to identify potential variances and potential disparities in outcomes and processes that impact our communities. So a lot of work in that space around education, proper use of data collection and analysis, and again, putting in methods to address how we can enhance the outcomes for our communities. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Pamela. We're so pleased to have you here. Claire?
Good morning. Hello, I'm Claire Oliveros. Thank you also, Yolanda, for the opportunity to be here with our esteemed panelists. I'm honored and privileged to be here with you all. And thank you for those that are here in attendance. I see some friends from Oregon in the chat. Hello, Laura Harani and others. I'm delighted to be here and introduce myself. I'm Claire Oliveros, and I'm the newest president, 13th president at Riverside City College in Riverside, California. We're one of 3 college district. So I report to a Chancellor Isak, Dr. Isak, and have college president peers at 2 other colleges, Moreno Valley College and Norco College. And Riverside City College is in the Inland Empire region. We are a large urban and rural district. We are serving nearly 20,000 students, and we're an Hispanic serving institution, serving nearly 64% of our student population that identifies Latinx Hispanic. We're in the middle of Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month, and have a commitment and focus on supporting the racial equity and diversity across all of our student populations. And in the state of California, we've made tremendous gains in doubling down our efforts to focus our strategic planning efforts in diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, anti-racism, and justice. In my role as president, just 3 months in, I'm early in my tenure. I have the opportunity to oversee our strategic planning process and framework. And we have a commitment and a vision and a focus on student access to reach our most impacted communities by systems of inequality and injustice. We have a focus on student success and closing opportunity gaps to ensure that our students who are also coming from marginalized communities are receiving access, resources, and support to complete their courses, transfer level math and English, for example, complete their certificates, degrees, and opportunities to transfer. So we have a commitment in ensuring all of our students experience a comprehensive, holistic approach to being seen and heard and served in the community colleges. And that's because of some early reforms focused on educational pathways towards career and transfer. And with high numbers of students of color at our institution, particularly RCC, but also across the country in community colleges, we are serving highest numbers of students of color, highest numbers of bilingual, multilingual students, highest numbers of students who are affected by poverty or intergenerational poverty, high numbers of students who are impacted by basic needs and food and housing insecurity, students who are student parents, veterans, returning or military impacted students, also students who may have experienced being in the foster youth system or our foster youth and having been in the foster system. So our community colleges are situated in such a way that we have had to be progressive, responsive, innovative, and inclusive and supportive to ensure there are support services. Now, we don't always get it right, but we have opportunities utilizing our strategic planning processes to make sure we're focused not only on access and student success, but also ensuring that equity is a guiding North Star for us, and also embedded in our institutional effectiveness and planning, our resource development and allocation, and also helping us move the needle on closing opportunity gaps for our students most affected by structural inequities and barriers. And prior to stepping into this role 3 months ago, I served as the Vice President of Institutional Equity and Research and Planning, which was an inaugural role at my previous institution, which was a large multi-college district in Sacramento. And before that, a Vice President of Student Services. And here in California, we've had many years and a couple of decades to address anti-affirmative action and pushback in our DEI efforts, and have really worked strategically and also through legislative processes in the state chancellor's office and with our boards of trustees and with the state board of governors to ensure that our DEI, AA, and justice are embedded in our policies, procedures, and then influencing our practices at the colleges. And I spent a bulk of my career in Oregon. So I'm so thrilled to also be able to provide an Oregon perspective and be here among colleagues who are also in Oregon. I spent about 18 years at Portland Community College, serving as their inaugural and founding coordinator of the Multicultural Center, and stepped into a role as interim director for the revitalized Office of Equity and Inclusion, which now I believe is a chief diversity officer. And so have had opportunities to start and develop and launch early DEI, AAJ efforts within the community college system and university systems in Oregon, Virginia, and now California. And again, honored to be here and look forward to our dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for all that great information and insight and background. We really appreciate you joining us today. Linda.
Hi, thank you, Yolanda, and many thanks to WTIA and in particular Gregory Glover for inviting me to be part of this very important discussion today. Gregory is an outstanding member of WGU's Distinguished Alumni Council, and we're grateful for his contributions towards our mission at WGU, which is to change lives for the better by providing pathways to opportunity. Well, let me start off really quickly just by describing Western Governors University, or WGU. Despite our dramatic growth in recent years and scaled impact nationwide, many people still don't know about us. So WGU is a nonprofit accredited fully online university, and we were founded in 1997 by 19 bipartisan governors of the Western states. And since our inception, 26 years ago, WGU has focused on advancing equity by increasing access to higher education, by offering affordable tuition, flexible online learning, and measuring competencies as opposed to measuring seat time, which allows our students to progress at their own pace. We know at WGU that education is one of the surest pathways to a better life, and therefore expanding access to learning and the opportunity that it affords, we are advancing equity for all. So I'm proud of the fact that today WGU has graduated over 340,000 students in the short time that we've been around. And we currently enroll 145,000 students nationwide. And this is including 70% of our students coming from one or more historically underserved populations. So I serve as the regional vice president for the South region, and I encompass 5 states: Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. I'm based here in Texas. You could see my background as a Lone Star state. I oversee the establishment of strategic partnerships with our community colleges, school districts, healthcare organizations, and corporations. And we establish these partnerships to expand access to really the working adults who are juggling full-time jobs and families, those who really can't benefit from a traditional brick and mortar institution. And we address workforce needs by offering degree programs, bachelor's and master's degrees in the 4 high demand fields of IT, business, healthcare, which includes nursing, and education. So one of our university-wide priorities, in addition to increasing student completions and giving our students a good return on their investment, is to provide that equity and access on a broader scale, on a major scale nationwide. So we're laser focused on providing equitable access and attainment to populations historically underserved in higher education. This includes learners from those who identify as people of color, low income, from rural areas, and first generation students. So as a leader at WGU, one of my responsibilities is ensuring that my team is diverse and reflects the population that we aim to serve, as well as fostering a more inclusive and equitable work environment where everyone feels valued and empowered. Again, it's a real pleasure to be here among such a highly distinguished panel. So thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you so much, Linda. We're thrilled to have you, of course. So let's go ahead and kick it open and get started on some of these questions that everyone, I'm sure, is really interested in hearing your perspective on. I'd like for the panel to give a brief overview and history of the DEI landscape in your state or in your institution. Let's start with Linda and Claire on this one, but as we know that the challenges against affirmative action in Texas and California in higher education institutions began like years ago. So can you provide us with some perspective on that? And how have, has the landscape really shifted and been more challenging? And we'll start with Linda.
Well, let me begin by saying that the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action didn't impact WGU because we don't use race as an admissions factor. Additionally, the Texas legislature recently enacted a law that bans DE&I in higher ed. But again, it didn't impact WGU since we're a private institution. And we don't meet the definition in the legislation. So I'm very pleased with that. But although my institution wasn't directly impacted by these changes, I can speak to the history of affirmative action because I lived and worked through it beginning in the mid-90s. So before joining WGU about 3.5 years ago, I worked in higher education policy at the Texas legislature from 94 to 2000, and then at the Higher Ed Coordinating Board from 2000 to 2020. So it all started with Hopwood versus the state of Texas in 1996. And that case challenged the affirmative action admissions policy at UT Law School. And the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals essentially ruled that using race as a factor in admissions decisions was unconstitutional. Our Attorney General at the time then took that ruling and applied it to all affirmative action in higher education at public institutions of higher ed across the state. And it included scholarship programs, grant programs, state financial aid. So it was all encompassing. And at the time, this was in 1996. It was the year before the 1997 legislative session. And my boss, who was State Representative Irma Rangel, she was a Democrat from Kingsville. She was the chair of the House Higher Education Committee. She worked with academians to come up with a plan to address that, a race-neutral approach to ensuring diversity in our state colleges and universities. And that plan was House Bill 588, which is the top 10% law. And that top 10% guaranteed automatic admission for students graduating from a Texas public or private high school in the top 10% of their class. And as a result, we saw that diversity was sort of rebounded after Hopwood, and we started to see an uptick not only with Black and Hispanic students, but also low-income rural white white students because the doors of opportunity suddenly opened for them where they typically weren't in that path to attend a flagship institution. But because segregation, our high schools are still highly segregated in Texas, it actually worked because you saw a lot of students in the top 10% that were all Black, all Latina. So it worked for a while. And then fast forward to about 7 years later in 2003, Grutter versus Bollinger, the US Supreme Court essentially reversed Hopwood. And that said that race could be considered as one of many factors. So taking that holistic approach, it essentially outlined that higher ed institutions do have a compelling interest in promoting diversity or with that holistic approach. So this obviously prompted UT Austin, which is the state's flagship institution, to recommit to affirmative action. In 2016, the Supreme Court also ruled in Fisher versus the University of Texas at Austin, once again reaffirmed the constitutionality of affirmative action. And so we go on, and then that brings us to June of this year, where the Supreme Court effectively ended race-based admissions programs. In Texas, the only institution that was impacted by this was UT Austin, because all of the other institutions had pivoted after Hopwood, and so they stopped using race as a criterion. So switching over to DE&I landscape in Texas, so the Texas legislature, as I mentioned earlier, recently passed Senate Bill 17, which bans DE&I at the state's colleges and universities. And that legislation goes into effect January 1 of 2024. The fundamental prohibitions as part of that legislation is that DE&I offices are prohibited. Performing any DE&I duties of a DE&I office is prohibited. DE&I statements are prohibited. Giving preference based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, national origin, all prohibited. And then any mandatory DE&I training is prohibited. So there's a lot of prohibitions there. There is some flexibility built into the legislation for grant applications and that sort of thing, federal funding sources, accreditation compliance issues. But beyond that, DE&I is pretty much dead in Texas higher education. I'll move on, go on to the next.
Yeah, and we're gonna circle back to some of those challenges with such extensive mitigating factors that come into play in Texas. We're gonna kind of circle back to that, but I wanna hear from Claire on how this impact has been difficult to navigate in California.
Yes, well, DEI is not dead in California. Proudly to say, community colleges, as you know, the history, we are open access and cost a third of the price tag of a University of California or California State University. So we are serving the community. We are the people's colleges. And with that have to be responsive during times of prolonged crisis like global pandemic and global racial injustices and climate change impacts. So I appreciate the history that Linda has provided. It's really helpful context to think about where California is today and where Oregon has been and the influence that I experienced in Virginia. Prop 209 was on the heels of some of the Supreme Court rulings in 1996. And so it has impacted UC system and CSUs, whereas for community colleges, because we're open access, really we're not as directly impacted. Open access for admissions and have very close partnerships with our K-12, K-14 partners. And so the community college system I'm not a historian of higher ed, but I'm definitely fascinated by our journey in higher education, community colleges and universities, for example, in colleges. Community colleges served a role in the 20th century to prepare students for work. So when we think about 1960s, well, my college is 107 years old. So in 100 years ago, Riverside City College was an extension of the vocational technical high school. So we've always been central to community and serving a role to ensure there's training and employment career opportunities, and then expanded in community colleges to be open access to have first women and people of color to enroll. So when you think about higher education and community colleges, they weren't designed specifically for women and people of color and first generation students to enroll in, but became an extension of high school to train workers. So when I think about the legacy and the tradition of Riverside City College being 100 years old, some of the focus on DEI efforts, for example, really came out of civil rights movements. So when I think of the history of RCC, in particular, first Black student, first Black faculty, first woman faculty member, we are here on the heels of the efforts of the civil rights movement of the 60s and those ancestors who pioneered the way to be the first in the 50s and 60s, and then to support the movements that have opened up the floodgates to have more people of color and women and first generation students, et cetera, in our community college settings and university settings. In partnership with our state chancellor's office, so if you know anything about the state of California, we are 117 community colleges and districts, very large. I mean, large, also like the state of Texas, and work collaboratively with our state assembly. And on the heels of some of the activism and social movements of the 60s, there has been progressive focus on supporting access or recruitment. At the time, we called recruitment and retention of students of color. So the birth of Umoja program supports Black student success. The birth of the Puente program, and 30 plus years ago, birthed out of activism and faculty, Black and Latinx faculty who saw a need to ensure there was access, open access, and support and retention programs for students of color. And then more programs beyond that. But I'm drawing on those early successes and wins as struggles for social justice and civil rights in higher education, because it wasn't open access. And some of the anti-affirmative action and anti-DEI efforts really need to be couched or contextualized in systems of oppression and institutional forms of oppression that have been designed to keep power in the hands of a few. And so some of the noise around pushing back on DEI is real. And in California, we've responded with program design, program development, coupled with activism and support for community-based organizations, and responding to the changing demographics these last 30 years that are going to continue to change. We have high numbers of bilingual, multilingual students of color coming out of high school into colleges, and we have had to have a focus on being student-ready colleges and institutions grounded in a vision and infrastructure of equity. And so applying for federally funded grants, applying for state grants, applying for private and public foundation partnership, private foundation and public and private partnerships have enabled us to ensure that we're keeping our students of color and LGBTQ students and foster youth and student parents, et cetera, all of the diversity of our students in mind when they're coming to our colleges. And then there's been on the political front some work around trying to lift the ban from Prop 209 from 1996, but that failed in 2020 There was a ballot measure in California that close margin, but it failed. And so now post the Supreme Court ruling, it's just enabled us to refocus or double down our efforts on our DEI-AAJ work and work in collaboration and partnership with state, local, regional, national partners and foundations to ensure we're providing access and retention for students of color. And I'm saying broadly our Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, and also our LGBTQ plus student communities, and ensuring that our faculty also are able to thrive and flourish in an environment where there's challenges against our DEI work. We're a state that has required ethnic studies, a requirement at the community college, high school, community college, and transfer. So we've also hired an influx of ethnic studies faculty in the last couple of years, and we're making progress and gains in ensuring that ethnic studies continues, at least in our region, in Inland Empire and Riverside City College and our Riverside Community College District.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Claire. I want to make sure that we preserve enough time to talk about these impacts on the workplace. And Linda, I want to make sure, excuse me, Pamela, I want to make sure that I am directing this question to you, but I want to briefly provide some context before I issue the question here. The law firm of Fager Drinker actually published a response and opinion after the ruling around the implications for employers. And one of the things that they stated in here on the implications to private and public employers, that they should expect that litigants to apply this decision to challenge their DEI programs, even though the actions at issue by Harvard UNC are governed by the Title VII and the 14th Amendment, and employment actions are governed by Title VII. So we want to understand how specifically, Pamela, your organization, your practices, your policies, really have changed due to this Supreme Court ruling, and how you might mitigate some of this risk as there is case law supporting some of this in terms of discriminatory practices and reverse discrimination that are brought to the forefront, and that we anticipate there will be more litigation activity as a result. So how are you ensuring that the focus on DE&I is central to the work of the organization, but also kind of mitigating some of that legal risk?
Yeah, thank you, Yolanda. Great question. So one, we don't want to be in a space where we're fearful and we back down, right? So there are legitimate reasons why DE&I is here and why it evolved as it did, right? So when you think about it, especially in the context of healthcare, it's kind of counterintuitive to think of a business that would have aspects that would fail out, right? So when I consider fail out, those individuals who have adverse health outcomes compared to the norm, if we consider the dominant culture the norm, and that we use data to be specific and start to look at outcomes. Just to think about that, if we were some other industry and like a certain portion of your cars failed or your planes didn't fly, that would make no sense, right? So why do we accept that in healthcare, period, right? And to say that there's not a need, there is evidence, right? So when I think it's more important than ever to bring that information forward to justify why we're doing what we're doing. So we have numerous programs and initiatives to keep the light on that focus, right? So it's not as though these are things that are arbitrarily put forward. If we look at the numbers, just stepping back a second, just looking at from the academic side, the dearth of Black males in particular, but women also, and coming out of going into medical school, right? There's a dearth, and we know that there's studies that show that there's a significant difference when there's concordance between patients and their providers in terms of race, right? So minoritized groups who have physicians who are of similar background race, their outcomes or their clinical outcomes are going to be better. So when you have a dearth of folks represented in medicine and other aspects of industry, that's going to affect patient outcomes, or just overall, again, the health of our societies. when you think about socioeconomics, which is a huge driver, right? Again, staying within the healthcare context, within the context of everything in our societies, there are differences, right? In terms of how people access care, where they get care, how they get care. And we can't ignore that as being real either. So for us, we have numerous programs, many pathway programs, as we call them, to bring individuals forward, to provide education to young folks to come through our academic schools, whether it be our nursing school, our medical school, our graduate schools, and also to help others who are moving through into health administration roles, because we know that otherwise they won't be there. And if they're not there, the needs, again, of the population who we're trying to serve will not be met. And again, it's contrary to what medicine is. It's contrary to what healthcare is. Healthcare shouldn't be something where, well, if you're only in this particular group, are you going to benefit? And that's the structure in the core, and that's where we are when we talk about structural racism and where we are. The denial that this exists is really the problem, right? Obviously. So what we're continuing to do is to put forth our programs in a way where we are justifying, like there are reasons why we have these programs. There's reasons why we're focusing. There's a reason why we have educational programs embedded in our communities and working with many partners to get students and other folks interested in careers in medicine and healthcare, because we know that it's necessary. So yes, we know that there's the threat, on understanding this, the Title VI, focused on admissions, and there will be that threat. But if you think about it, a lot of the work that we've been doing over the years has been threatened, right? There's been other litigation that's come forward. This is, when I say this is nothing new, it's important and it's a critical time for us, but we've been threatened before. We've been down this road before in our history in this country.
Civil rights movement, right?
Yeah. Let's, we've been there, done that, and we're gonna. But we are focused on staying strong. We have, for our institution, it's core to our mission. We are an anti-racist organization. With that means addressing those structures, policies, and practices that allow some to thrive and others not to thrive, right? And those injustices. So I believe if we speak the truth about those injustices and not make it just about numbers and we're doing it for just because we want numbers of people, but it's because there's a reason behind it and it's evidence-based. I think that will hold, be easier to uphold and to support what we're doing. And I heavy focus on evidence and data for me. We now have the ability, institutions at large have the ability to capture information and use it appropriately. So more so than ever, being able to use data that you collect on your patients, on your staff and others, but particularly, again, looking at outcomes if you're in healthcare, looking at patient data based on where people live, their socioeconomic background, and their race and other factors, you will be able to then demonstrate why it's necessary that we have programs and initiatives where we want to make sure that we're bringing the right people into the organizations and that we need this in medicine. It's fundamental. No other industry would allow this to happen, right? And fail in such a manner.
Right. That's absolutely right. I want to highlight another excerpt from this particular article, and Claire, I'd love for you to provide your perspective along with Pamela and others as well. Please feel free to chime in. The article talks about, as a preliminary matter, we need to note that affirmative action program instituted by employers should not automatically be grouped with DEI program intended to increase diversity representation in the workplace. Voluntary affirmative action programs in the employment context are rare, is what this article states. They are premised on an employer's acknowledgement that there's statistically significant discrimination that needs to be remedied. Okay, under the prior Supreme Court precedent, affirmative action programs are permitted if they are targeted to the remedial purpose, do not necessarily hinder the interests of non-diverse individuals, and are directly addressed by students for fair admissions, is what it states here. So Weber, it looks like it's the United Steelworkers versus Weber. They're saying that did not, which is the precedent court ruling or case, was addressed by students for fair admissions. And so For now, it remains for the lower courts, because of that ruling, to determine if Weber still stands in that regard. So in addition to the voluntary and affirmative action programs referenced, what I just referenced, federal contractors and subcontractors may also be subject to affirmative action requirements in the following ways. And let me briefly state that. The challenges to employer-based DE&I programming. However, separate from affirmative action programs, employers can expect challenges to their DE&I programs based on this Weber's decision, on the Weber decision as well. As a preliminary matter, Justice Gorsuch concurring opinion makes the link from Title VII from Title VI to Title VII by stating that both sections codify a categorical rule of individual equality without regard to race. So current opponents of the DEI programs are already citing this decision as support for Title VII challenges of reverse discrimination based on allegations of an adverse impact on non-diverse employees or employees that are outside the group intended to benefit from DEI initiatives. What say you? This is a significant point. Crystal?
Yeah.
Chime in, anyone. Claire, this is significant, right?
I just want to say one thing. I know Crystal wants to respond as well. So just on one point that you made, when we think about DE&I programs, and I think this is fundamental, and people think that we're just benefiting Blacks and Latino or whoever. But if one really understands what happens when you have diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives within an organization, the water rises for everyone. Right? And if we focus on that and use language that addresses, yes, white men can also benefit in DE&I programs, right? It's not just only about Black people. And I always say this, I wish there were another word to use now, because when you say diversity, folks' minds go directly to just Black, right? But if we focus on benefiting all, for those who, for everyone to benefit, it could be for different reasons. People, socioeconomically, disability, whatever it is, cultural things, language, everyone can benefit. And I think that's what we have to really put forward as we think about why do we want to sustain having DE&I going forward. It's not just for a few folks, it's the water will rise for all.
Thank you for that addition, Pamela. Crystal?
Sure, absolutely. I think there's a conflation between the idea about how historical diversity programs were connected so directly to affirmative action. The goal of them was to help remedy the effects of past and present discriminatory patterns and practices. And we did need some kind of way to ameliorate that and to improve it for our caregivers, our employees, our students, our learners. Now, to Pamela's point, when you look at diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, access, social justice, it's a much broader framing. For our organization, we actually aren't as worried because we're not framing our DEIB program from an affirmative action stance, which is about compliance. It is legal. And so it's a very different framework. I think to our workforce development efforts, to Pamela's point, when we're looking at trying to help our employers or organizations secure talent to fill these empty roles and seats that would cause our organizations to shut down, we have to think broadly. We have to think more inclusively. We need to be strategic. We need to pivot. We need to be creative. It's about that. It's not about trying to take seats from the majority. That's not the goal here. The goal is to look at your workforce and see how they are serving you, and how if you in turn serve them, then we can all rise together. And so I think we have a program now where we are trying to figure out, if we have employees who are hourly employees, they don't get time off for professional development, what can we do to augment their access? Well, we can partner with a local organization, have cohorts at our site where they don't have to leave to go get this education. They go through a program and they rise from being environmental service, staff who do housekeeping to now they're service techs. And their improvement is our improvement, right? And so it's not about, we want to eradicate white people, we want to eradicate males. I used to be a civil rights investigator at Oregon Health and Science University, so hi to my Oregon peeps. I did that for years, and before that I was at Portland State University, also as a civil rights investigator right out of law school. And one of the things I realized immediately when I would do quarterly learning around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging around affirmative action was that there would be people in the sessions who would sit there with their arms crossed. They would completely disengage because they thought we weren't talking about them. So some of the onus lies on us as DEID practitioners to make sure that our language is inclusive, to make sure that we are defining what we're talking about so people don't get to have their own notions about this and run away with their ideas about who we're serving. I had to start off my sessions by saying, who has a race? People kind of raise their hand. Who has a gender? People raise their hand. The law doesn't say it protects Black people or Asian people or Indigenous people. It says it protects you if you're being discriminated against or treated poorly because of your race. And so then people are like, oh, so if you're a white male, because you have a gender, and you're being treated poorly or suffering in a diverse disparate impact in the workplace, you can come to our office and secure support and services as well. And then all of a sudden people are like, oh, I'm included. People don't want to be excluded. And so the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and access is about inclusion. It's about listening to the marginalized voices and factoring them into the decisions that we're making. Our organization prides itself on being a Lean Six Sigma organization, an organization that goes to the Gemba, that says we want to go to the place where the work is done, to hear from the people who do the work so that we can do it better. And if our folks don't believe that we value their perspective, we're not going to get the insight that we need to improve our organization. This isn't about giving handouts to them. Honestly, this is kind of self-centered. In organizational practices, diversity work is all about how do we help hear from the people who do the work, who have the innovative ideas, who usually aren't at the table to contribute to the conversation and getting that feedback. So I feel like we're not as worried about that because our goal and our orientation to how we approach diversity work is not set in affirmative action principles anymore. It's really about how do we make sure that all of our caregivers, which is what we call all our employees, feel heard, feel valued and respected. When they don't, is there an effective and transparent mechanism for them to communicate that sentiment so that we can address it, so we can do better and be better, to be the best place to give care and the best place to get care for all. And that's a very different orientation. So I feel like the other thing that Pamela says that I feel like we're not talking about is being honest. What are people saying? What is subtext? What is pretext? And what's actually on the table? Because we are litigating things that actually aren't at issue. We haven't been making decisions primarily on race for years, and we definitely don't do that in the workplace. It's still illegal. So our job is to make sure that we are doing things properly by the book. We're not out here, doing subterfuge, making sure that we're bringing in unqualified people of color. That's not at all what we're doing. And that I think needs to be stated clearly as a pushback to this notion that we're somehow giving out handouts to people who don't deserve it. And I will yield the floor.
I agree 100%. And I also know that really understanding the definition of affirmative action and talking, from an employer perspective and saying that we're ensuring that we are taking an affirmative action to be more inclusive, that we offer the equal opportunity and the equal access to education, to employment, to benefits, to all of those things. And the distinction needs to be understood. And those who have worked under affirmative action or overseeing those functions within organizations really understand, what are we doing in terms of outreach efforts? How are we ensuring that we're making sure that underrepresented groups actually do have the access to be able to ensure that they have the same opportunities as everyone else? And so that distinction is important. And I'd like to hear from Linda a little bit more about that distinction, right? And your perspective on that as well.
Well, thank you. And first of all, let me thank Pamela and Crystal for your comments. I loved everything you said and agree wholeheartedly. Let me also share, just to piggyback on that conversation. WGU is doubling down on our DE&I efforts to send a message to all learners that regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of their experiences, their motivations, their expectations, that they are all welcome at WGU, that they are valued, and that they feel a sense of belonging. And I think when you use that terminology, I think that resonates with a broader and its group, and it's more inclusive. And what we do at WGU is that we do recognize that we have diverse students, and that they are going to persist and succeed in very different ways. They have different needs. They, you know, wherever it is that they're coming from, and we want to meet them where they're at. So we view DE&I as rejecting a one-size-fits-all model to learning. So it's about honoring diverse perspectives, lived experience, you know, diverse lived experiences, and really responding to the students' individual needs with personalized intervention so that every learner succeeds. And that is the core of our model at WGU. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, students can't benefit from traditional institutions. We do it a little different so that we can be more accessible and deliberate in and intentional in who we're serving and why and how. So sorry, I had to share that because I just got really pumped up with the conversation before. But I think going back to your original question, Yolanda, was how do we differentiate the work of DE&I from affirmative action? And you know, there is a distinction between the two, although they're very, very related concepts, and it really is going to depend on the context and the different interpretations by organizations and institutions. And I would say, you know, affirmative action really has its primary focus on those historical and systemic inequalities, and trying to provide opportunities to underrepresented or disenfranchised, marginalized groups to ensure that they have equal representation and to really remedy that past discrimination. And DE&I is much broader, like we've been talking about. It does create the inclusive environment to promote equal opportunities for everyone. You know, DE&I, it's about including everyone all of the time, not excluding anybody at any time. So we just need to get a better messaging to ensure that the people receiving these messages are hearing that they belong, that they matter, that they value. And so, well, I'll stop there. I can go on and on.
I just want to add to something Linda said, if I may. I think it's really important for folks to understand the definitions, because I think inherently there's a lot of the problems emanate there. Because again, going back to what Crystal said earlier, DE&I, we're talking about people who are disabled, LGBTQ, people, you know, language, culture. But there's this misinterpretation now that we're only talking about getting jobs and things for Black people or Latino. And that's not what it is. And then we have to think about all the intersections, right? The intersectionality between groups. That's what we're doing. So again, enforcing what you said, Linda, it's about everyone and everything. It's not just about one group of people. And that's contributing to the problem. But if you can think about the converse, take all that out of an organization, right? So say to folks, okay, you don't want DE&I, so there are LGBT groups, people with disabilities, all these age, all the programs. Then what will you have for an organization when no one's caring about you? Because most people are going to find themselves in all those things that I just said, right? You're going to identify with one of those areas. And then what happens when no one's focusing on how you belong in an organization or the needs that you have? And that's what we really should be talking about. What happens if we don't have those things and why it's so important, not just on, you know, looking at numbers of how many Black and Latinos that
Absolutely. And when we do that, it does push the underrepresented and the marginalized further to the margins, right? It absolutely does do that. So I have a question that I want the whole panel to chime in, and we have probably about 25 minutes left, but I want to make sure we leave space for questions. And so my question is, while affirmative action ruling is targeted towards highly selective colleges, its effects can be felt across the DE&I industry, as we know that. We know this to be true. According to anecdotal and survey evidence, we know this to be true. Some practitioners report experiencing a chilling effect to DE&I efforts. And in that, they're concerned that their organizations will withdraw their commitments to DE&I for fear-based, right? Given the very public displays of dissent and resentment. We're seeing that happen, phone calls to CEOs, et cetera. In this landscape, what advice would you give to practitioners and the people audience out here who work in organizations where executive leaders are ambivalent or anxious about supporting DE&I? And let's start with Crystal. We'll go down the line.
What advice would I give? I come from a perspective of thinking about pivot towards positive. I take everything that is given to me and I look at it and see how can we get to where we're going? The ambivalence, I think, often comes from a lack of clarity. So I feel like you really have to engage in conversations and find out where their apprehension is coming from. And then you have honest conversations about what you can do and what you can't do in the sphere of your influence. One of the things that I have learned in my years of serving first as a civil rights investigator, and then as a operational trainer on unconscious bias, and now as a director of diversity, is that people come to us because we're quite an effective conflict resolution, conflict management tool, because we are primed to think about things more inclusively and more expansively. We don't necessarily stick to the status quo about how things have historically been done, and we're able to gently and respectfully raise issues and concerns to leadership to help them actually begin to frame out whatever their strategy is more comprehensively. Coming from a legal background, I think of it as you need to know the counter argument, and then you need to be able to rise up and offer a solution for that. And I feel like DEID practitioners are incredibly competent at serving in that capacity. And so I would say that if you have leaders that are apprehensive about you serving in a role in your DEID role, scrap the title, scrap the language. You don't have to lean into necessarily needing to use diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. If it's becoming more of an obstacle to use that language and those labels and those terms, think about your intended outcome. What are we collectively trying to achieve? And how can I support you in getting there from a people-centered lens, from a patient-centered lens? And I feel like that actually gets people on board. I've literally seen people breathe a sigh of relief. When I say, I don't really care who people are at home. You can be a racist to the core, but when you come to work, you put on your work avatar, you adhere to our policies, procedures, practices, our standards of respect, our code of conduct, and your ethical principles that you signed on to when you became a medical practitioner. As long as you do that in the workplace and you're caring for people, you're not harming others, I don't care who you are at work. We're not trying to change hearts and minds all the time. Sometimes we are, and I think that's important, and we need to come from a place of hope and aspiration. But I think more than anything, we have to remind people of what is our goal and how can we get there. Sometimes we get so focused on the history and the hurt and the harm that we allow it to distract us from where we're going, and we end up circulating around concepts that we're never going to agree on. And I feel like it's okay to admit that and then saying, okay, what can we do moving forward? So in terms of the apprehension, I find that it's effective to, not be afraid to step away from DEID specific language, as long as you stay true to the desired end result, which is an equitable workplace that offers equal opportunity for all. And then the other thing I like and I've learned to do is learn to speak their language rather than trying to force them to speak ours. So I work for an organization and I quickly realized white lean language. I had never been in an organization like that. I got white belt trained, I got yellow belt trained, and I'm currently in my green belt candidacy so that I can learn how to speak to what they're talking about. We're talking about the same things usually, but if I'm using my language to talk about it, I lose people. When I pivot and say, I'm not talking about hearing from all the voices, I'm talking about going to the Gemba, all of a sudden people are like, oh, I know what that means and I can get behind it. So those are the tips that I would offer in terms of helping to assuage that fear and trepidation around people leaning into DEID. You don't have to always stay in that space.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
next,
I was just going to add, thank you, building on that from the community college perspective, higher ed perspective, for us, and in my view, it's embedded in the framework. So if we're guided by our strategic planning process and the framework of the 5 areas I mentioned, access, student success, institutional effectiveness, resource planning and allocation, resource development and allocation, and community engagement, we've embedded our DEI-AAJB into this work, and it becomes part of our procedures, practices, and culture in the organization to make sure that that it's there. So it's not an add-on, it's not separate. And from wherever you're sitting in the organization, you play a role and have a role to play in increasing our responsiveness and competencies in these areas. And then, of course, there's compliance. So we follow Title V, Title III, et cetera, but really lean into it as a college cultural practice and procedural critical mission focus, because it's also in our mission, in addition to the strategic planning process, it's in our mission, vision, and values. So for us, it's part of our work in higher ed, whether you're a classified professional, faculty, administrator, student. We're talking about it across all fronts and ensuring that there's professional development across all employee groups. And we utilize our participatory shared governance structure to ensure that the design is across thought partners and thought leaders.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
And then lastly, I'm sorry, it's also embedded in our evaluation process. And I think that's an important acknowledgement that many of us had been advocating for 20 years ago, is how do we also evaluate and assess and work to support cultivating and developing expertise in this area. And so again, it doesn't matter if it's in your title or in your role, we also embed it in a reflective evaluation process. And that hasn't been required. And so faculty in California are working to create a repository of resources and also a process for an equity reflection statement in faculty evaluation. And then the state is working with colleges around one. There's a new assembly bill that also encourages, or that has encouraged and supports evaluation, equity as an evaluation metric in performance reviews. And that's still working out details for implementation, but it is something that's been on our radar, and we do incorporate it in our professional development plans.
Excellent. And we often talk about the importance of alarms management, which includes how are you auditing, making sure that all of the practices that you've put in place to ensure that these things happen are actually equitable, and that everyone is accountable, right? So there's some accountability measures in there. There's mission critical pieces. There are a lot of pieces of data that help you to collectively tell the story and also to validate any kind of focus or initiative or perspective on what you're doing inside the organization. So alarms management is really critical. And however you determine through Six Sigma or whatever that you determine, you evaluate what your evaluation system is going to be, it should be one that's well vetted and one that's consistent across the board as well. Next up, I think was Linda or Pamela wanted to chime in on this aspect. And then we do have a couple questions we want to get to as well.
Well, I would just add that, you know, as I was preparing for this, I was thinking and having conversations with various sides and getting different perspectives. You know, some people believe that a colorblind laws should be the goal to achieve equity. And I think they have good intentions. But on the flip side, and I'll quote the Supreme Court's first Black female justice, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who wrote in her dissenting opinion, she said, "Deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life."
That's right.
And I think that was that resonated with me, because while the ideal is to have a race neutral approach to everything that we do, the fact of the matter is that racism still exists, systemic racism exists, discrimination, microaggressions, all of that still exists. And so we need protections. We need to be able to continue to double down on these efforts. You know, I would say to organizations, continue your intentions of being more diverse and expanding equity and inclusion. But again, use the language that resonates, that is more inclusive to the masses. Continue those efforts. I do want to also make one last point in terms of the scope of this. When you look at it from a higher education perspective, I listen a lot to Jeffrey Salingo, who is the author of Who Gets In and Why, and he's done a lot of writing in higher education over the years, he sort of put it into perspective for me. He said it's 200 out of 2,800 universities in the US that this ruling has impacted. And all of those leaders, I wouldn't say all of them, but many of them have come forward and said, we are going to continue our efforts. What that looks like, we're going to have to be creative, we're going to have to be innovative, we're going to have to do things differently to be able to get that diverse pool of applicants and students into our universities. So I'm going to be an ultimate optimist that people are going to do the right thing and recognize that, you know, higher education will go out of business if they don't address the needs of the diverse students that are coming through the pipeline, and that we're losing along the K-12 higher ed pipeline. It's going to impact all of us, as we've heard from some of the other speakers here today. So,
and that's what you say, point blank period. That is more than true. Pamela, can you answer this question? We have a question from one of our participants, and how can businesses commit to DE&I programs while protecting themselves from potential litigation? Thanks for that question, Karen.
Sure, thank you. I think it goes back a little bit to what Crystal was saying, that how we put things forward in the language that we use. So if you don't, if people are offended by the word diversity, don't use it, right? It doesn't mean you can't still go forward with the programming and the practices that you want to have to support individuals in the organization. You know, I think sometimes it's, again, how we put things forward, and also to make sure that programs that we're promoting touch all aspects of individuals in the organization. So if someone comes forward and says, you know what, you're favoring whatever it may, what one particular group, say, no, this group is welcoming for everyone. And I keep focusing on white males, but whatever that group may be, right? Nope, they're welcome to come here. And also, really important, that DE&I should not be led solely by people of color, right? We have to have other leaders in organizations embrace being part of the team that's going to carry forward and lead initiatives that relate to this work. It cannot just be a body of people of color. That doesn't make any sense, right, when you think about it. So when you engage more with people who are different and have their faces seen, have their voices heard, if you're doing publications, notes, meetings, things, have a white leader be a lead of an ERG or your diversity councils or whatever it may be, right? Let them come forward and help the organization, because then on its face, what are we talking about in terms of, you know, only favoring a certain group? We have to invite everyone to be part of that, and that should be intentional. We've done that. I know in our institution, we have several of our hospital presidents who happen to be white males who led our diversity councils, who were seen, who were there, who were in the room working with staff and other such leaders. It shouldn't just be all about one group of people. So I think that helps. And then again, when you're putting together your strategies for the organization, again, have that representation from a group that is not just singularly one group of individuals, right? And have, go ahead.
Absolutely, I agree, and I will add to that as a somewhat dissenting voice a little bit around that we want to make sure that if you are having voices that are coming forward that are not of a diverse population, racially or ethnically, that they are understanding what it means to be an ally and a catalyst for this work.
Well,
need to be thinking through the lens of DE&I in order to effectively articulate its value.
Absolutely.
I have seen situations in the past where, you know, white leaders have come forward and they really get stuck and they are very, very confused around the actual intersectionality, the experience of those in marginalized populations. And so it feels a bit inauthentic, and it also can feel a little performative. So we encourage the embodiment of competencies that allow white allies and allies of dominant culture to actually speak through that lens and gain credibility around it. It's super important that we do that, because we're seeing the allyship come forward, but where we're struggling is still stalled efforts in DE&I. So that
it's important. It's important, Yolanda, it's so important to have the work done with whoever it is that's leading, right? So we at Mount Sinai have invested in having an outside person work with us, a group to come in with those leaders of varying backgrounds, to our strategy leads, as we call them, for our initiative, to work with them on understanding, and it's everybody, right? thinking about their own identities, their relationship to people from different backgrounds, poverty, race, other things.
Absolutely.
You're right, they have to be fueled up and taught this. No one wakes up in the morning or just, and knows how to do this, right? It's not necessarily taught in school, right?
That's right.
For professions, whether you're a physician, whether you're administrator, in other roles, it's not really taught what this means, or to be reflective. So we do a lot of work on that. And thank you for bringing that up. It's really important. And doing continual work with our leaders across the system around what does it mean? How do you lead in this space? But especially for those who are going to be sitting in seats directing the initiative. That takes a lot of upfront work to get everybody on board.
And getting people committed to doing it. And so there's a question about what does one need to do to get involved in this work? What do you recommend? Anyone from the panel, if someone is interested in getting involved in DE&I, what do you recommend? I recommend that you get good what is it called? Antacids. What are those things for your stomach? The things that you take so that you can make sure that, that you don't get ulcers and stuff. But self-care is the first thing that you need to focus on for this as well. But all joking aside, what from the panel do you think is important for folks to know if they're interested in getting involved?
Yolanda, I'll chime in just because what you said hit me. When I first got out of law school, my first supervisor told me I needed to have a thick lining of my stomach to do civil rights work. And I remember being like, wait, what did I get myself into? What is she talking about? But people can be pretty harsh and pretty cruel. This is not for those who can't receive criticism or pushback, whether it's founded or unfounded. You have to have that internal conviction. I feel like if you want to get into this work, you already have a heart, right? You're curious, which is I think one of the best tools that I've learned as a practitioner is when I get angry or frustrated, it's because I can't see it from their point of view, because maybe it seems ridiculous to me, or maybe it seems cruel to me. And I can get in my own way unless I teach myself to approach it with curiosity. Okay, Crystal, what are they saying? Why are they saying it? Ask those questions. The other thing I would say, if you're interested in getting into this work, is build relationships. Talk to people. Hear their stories. Why is this important to you? Hear what people are saying to you. And then I think one of the things that makes us effective in this work is that we know that we're liaisons and bridges and not the end all be all. Like, I'm not an expert. I'm a person who facilitates conversation. I'm a person who amplifies other voices. I'm a person who asks the questions that maybe other people have but don't have the courage to do so. And that way we are trying to amplify all the voices in this space, not just a certain voice. I mean, the inclination, of course, I'm Black and female in America. I'm overweight. I have a disability. I'm going to speak from my perspective at times because I don't see it represented. More often, when I started this role, I think about 6 months in, I thought about doing a little journal of a day in the life of a DEI practitioner where I'm just doing screen grabs of my Zoom meetings. Usually I'm the only brown face in that space. It's fascinating to me, not another Latino, Asian, and people want to complain, right? So I get a little annoyed when we're kind of going backwards with the presupposition that certain people are entitled to be in spaces, and when other people are imposing on that space and somehow they're taking what belongs to other people. I won't go off on that, but to go back to what you said, I feel like if a person is truly vested, one of the things that helps me is remembering why I got into it in the first place. I've been doing a version of this work since I was a little girl. I've always been an advocate for others because I feel like that is the core of what we do. Being a person who loves to listen and hear other people's stories and help to amplify it and share it with others. And being able to get out of your own way. I had a conversation with my chief diversity officer earlier about a situation that's going on now. And I said, I'm kind of angry about what's going on. And I was getting a little concerned that I wouldn't be able to get out of my own way. But having the relationship that I have with him, I'm able to process that. So when I go into the spaces later to do the listening sessions and to offer consultation or guidance, I can do so with his wisdom along with me and guidance so that I cannot it's not about me, right? And so Yolanda, you said something about sometimes the leaders, white leaders are learning to lean into the awkwardness. One of the frustrations I have about white allies often is that they will co-opt my voice and a voice of others, and then they start speaking for people instead of using that language that couches it in maybe, or I've heard, or research shows, or I've been told. It's like, this is how it is, and I don't care. So you're telling me as a person of color that when I use the word diversity to talk about religious holidays, that I'm the problem because now it should just be a holiday, but now I've made it separate from everything else. Okay, let's have a conversation. So I will pause there, but I feel like some of the key tenets are just sort of checking in regularly with yourself, getting out of your own way, building relationships, being a great listener, and being okay living as a bridge. And when you're a bridge, sometimes everybody hates you, right? Because you're the messenger.
That's exactly
and
right.
you have to be okay with that too.
So true. And I also tell people, be obedient to the calling on your life, right? And if it is the calling on your life, then you must understand that you are going to come up against polarized topics, that you are going to come up against resistance. And if you're going to dial back or shrink in light of that, this is not for you. And I say that because we've got to get to a place where we understand that people can have passion in this work and really want to do it, but then they get in it and then they start to see the resistance and the polarization, and they begin to back away, go, I don't want to lose my job. You must be resilient in doing this work. You must be dedicated. It has to be a part of who you are, your gift, your passion, what you believe, and you have to operate within that. And you must build the competencies to come up against polarization. So we encourage that. For anyone who wants to join in this work, we invite you in, but please be ready.
Yeah, I'll just add, I saw the question in there from a younger voice asking how to get involved. I think back to those of us that are in education, or if you're wanting to become an educator, I think it's important to get connected to a community-based organization or to an organization at your place of work or school or worship, wherever you are gathering, and find out what are some of the issues impacting you and your peers. That's one way to start to develop that curiosity that Crystal just mentioned, and also helps to activate a call to action within you and your group that you're meeting with about doing this work. And then, yes, it could become a profession. And if it is a profession that you want to explore, I highly recommend also taking an ethnic studies class if you're in high school, taking a gender studies class and ethnic studies class if you're in college. If there isn't one, there's some great ones online now. There are professors that are taking their discipline to Zoom. And what Yolanda mentioned earlier too about moving DEI, AABJ work into online spaces. There are avenues and outlets, and then connect with people that here on this call or in your community that are doing this work, and shadow them for a day or join them for the day, and then think about a major or minor that you want to pursue. If you've already graduated and are looking for opportunities to become an educator in DEI, AABJ work, then it would be great to connect with someone in the profession, and then also think about building community where you are, either in your neighborhood or in your place of employment or school, to identify what those issues are and work together across identity groups to address this, and the work will find you. Because there's no shortage of work in this field. And you can do this in whatever career or profession you're in. If you go into accounting or engineering or physics, we need DEI, BJ, equity-minded or minded folk in this work. So it doesn't have to also be your title. And know that it can be wherever you are working right now. You can develop this as a competency and be an ally and be in solidarity with the communities that may be most affected if it's not your community. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to our prestigious panel. We are extremely grateful for you today and for this insightful conversation. Maylene has mentioned in the chat, please fill out the post-event survey. We encourage you to do so. And I'm going to turn it back over to Maylene for closing.
Yes, thank you all so much. Such a rich conversation. We will have the recording of this available to everyone who participated or who joined us live today. Please don't forget to fill out the survey so that we can know how you thought about this event and how we can improve future ones. And thank you so much. We wanted to be mindful of time. We hope to see you at our next event around disability justice. Many thanks, everyone.